Good afternoon. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the Affordable Housing Committee meeting this afternoon. We appreciate everyone being with us. We have Commissioners Amanda Edwards and Parker Sloan and myself, Brownie Newman, here along with our staff. So thank you all and members of the public who are also joining us for this meeting, which we're of course holding virtually today. Let's go over the agenda, and we'll also touch base on the public comment process that we're going to use today. But just real quick, if folks could mute when they're not talking, that'd be great. So let's just quickly look at the new business items, and then we'll also talk about public comment. So we're going to talk about the Affordable Housing Committee's calendar over the next couple of months. We're going to have a presentation on the Mckinney-Vento, following up on some of the homeless discussions we've been having. Also on that, we're going to have some follow-up on some of the questions that were asked at the last meeting. We're going to have a presentation on voucher data. And then we're also going to have a discussion and presentation around our goals and policies, with an eye towards thinking ahead towards further county commission discussions at briefing meetings, and then eventually more formal consideration at a regular meeting. So any questions about any items on our agenda for today? All right, if not, Matt, would you provide us an overview of the public comment process and anything else about the agenda for today that we ought to be aware of, or what we're going to try to get accomplished today?
Certainly. So in terms of the public comment, we have our traditional means. So we had actually gone to all public input being in person, if the committee will recall and the public will remember. But obviously we've gone back to a virtual meeting scenario. With the notice of the meeting, there was an opportunity to submit input in writing before the meeting occurred, and we did not have or did not receive any input in advance of the meeting. So we now also have transitioned to platform under which we provide access to the meeting to be the engage.buncombe site. So if anyone is here, that requires a pre-registration in order to provide comment through that platform. And that will be the means by which we could engage virtually going forward until such time as we move back potentially to taking public input in person. Outside of that general comment, public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting as per the agenda, and we would be able to there are no other, comments about the agenda at this point from staff.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Matt, for clarification, how, if people want to make comments at the end of the meeting, how will they do that?
I can answer that one. On the public input platform, they click a button to allow them to say that they want to be in a queue for commenting, and then I'll let you know if someone's in line.
Okay, and so they'll just make their comments verbally through Zoom. They won't do like the chat. They'll do it like they'll just be allowed to speak.
Yes, but if chats come up, I'll make sure you all see them at the end of the meeting.
Okay, great, perfect, thanks. All right. Very good. Well, hey, if there's no other questions, then let's go ahead and jump into the first item under new business, which is a review of the Affordable Housing Committee's calendar. And Matt, I think you're going to walk us through this item.
Yeah, so this will be very brief. We really don't have any significant updates to the calendar at this point. It's just a reminder that beginning at our next meeting in February, we'll have a few additional items looking at a comprehensive plan presentation, what are other counties doing regarding homelessness, and then some goal setting surrounding homelessness. Then at our mid-February meeting, we'll be providing an update on the status of our contracts for the fiscal year 21 and 22 program, Affordable Housing Services program, as well as providing some opportunity for some additional goal setting surrounding homelessness. And then thereafter, we'll really move. The work of the committee will be surrounding the Affordable Housing Services Program application, which is slated to close on February the 11th. So that will be a focused effort by staff and the committee over the March and April time period in order to make recommendations to the full board regarding the funding of projects and also budget request.
Okay, great. Commissioners, any any questions about the calendar? You know, I don't really have a question about it. Maybe just kind of more of a comment on it. And it's not a suggestion that we amend any of that for this year. But I guess I would also just say, you know, I think that as we kind of think ahead about our goals and strategies and things like that, I think one of the questions we should continue to think about is kind of whether the process we're using right now will need to be, you know, thought about further as we think about these goals, or whether we think that basically kind of keeping a format very similar to what we have today will be effective in, like, you know, kind of moving towards these goals. And I don't necessarily have a like a position on that, but it's just kind of a question I have. And I know it's one we kind of have talked about in the past about whether it's, you know, the pros and cons of kind of more open applications versus these windows. I feel pretty good about where we're at right now. As we think about these bigger goals and things like that, I don't know. At some point, it maybe after we go through this year, and part of it should be kind of a reflection on, like, do we still feel like this is the right process for future years, or any kind of changes needed? I don't know. Just seems like something we should probably check in on from time to time. But I don't have any. If there's no other questions on this, I think we're ready to go on to the next item, which is the presentation on the McKinney-Vento program related to students facing homelessness or housing insecurity. And I think we have Shannon Boyd and Jessica Supik here, I hope I pronounced your name right, from the schools to talk to us about these programs and issues.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jessica Supik. I am the McKinney-Vento Liaison and Foster Care Coordinator for Asheville City Schools. And we have Shannon Boyd here too, that does Buncombe County Schools. She's the same role that I do. Shannon, are you on here?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Shannon Boyd. I am the McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Coordinator as well, and the director of the Buncombe County Schools Family Resource Center.
Perfect. Next slide, please. Or can I do it? First, we want to say thank you to the committee for allowing us to come on and just kind of provide some information on what Shannon and I both do to support our students and families with both our school districts. We are going to provide an overview and definition of what McKinney-Vento is, definition of unaccompanied homeless youth. We will provide the educational rights that fall under the McKinney-Vento Act and that support our students. We'll also provide the number of identified McKinney-Vento students throughout the past 4 years and provide some demographical data for them. We will review our funding resources and sources that give us the opportunity to run our programs. And then finally, we will just kind of give an overview of the services that both Shannon and I provide to our McKinney-Vento students and families. You can go to the next slide, please.
And Jessica, if you want to try, I attempted to give you control so that you might be able to advance the slide if you want to see if that's possible. If not, I'll advance for you either way.
Jessica, you're on mute.
All right, there we go. I'm sorry about that. It's messing up. Could we go back to the beginning of where it says McKinney-Vento federal law? Awesome. So the McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that's designed to increase the school enrollment, attendance, and success of children and youth who are identified as experiencing homelessness.
Hey, it's Ferry. I just wanted to check in and see how things are doing with your mom.
Could you go to the next slide? Perfect. So just an overview of the definition of how we identify students in our school systems. So McKinney-Vento, the term refers to homeless children and youth that lack a fixed, adequate, and nighttime residence. Fixed is a residence that is stationary, permanent, and not subject to change. Regular is a residence that's used on a daily basis, and we usually consider this nightly. And then adequate is a residence that is sufficient for meeting both the physical and psychological needs of a home environment. You can go to the next slide, please. So what does that look like for us? With the McKinney-Vento Act, where we are required to identify students who are considered doubled up, and this kind of differs from anything that goes under the HUD definition of being literally homeless. So our doubled up families are families and students that are living with another family member or friends due to the loss of housing or economic hardships. And currently, we're also seeing tripled up situations between both school districts. We identify students who are living in hotels, motels, or campgrounds, emergency or transitional shelters where students might be residing. We identify students and families who are living in cars, parks, public spaces, substandard housing, and this refers to housing that might not have water or electricity. We also identify any migratory youth that are living in the above circumstances. We identify victims of human trafficking, and I will say our victims of human trafficking that we identify from McKinney-Vento are all labor trafficking victims. And then we focus on our unaccompanied homeless youth that are also living in those McKinney-Vento definition as above. You can go to the next one, please. So our unaccompanied homeless youth, this is our most vulnerable population that we serve. Unaccompanied homeless youth is any student that's not living in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian and meets the criteria for a McKinney-Vento situation, and that includes lacking a residence that is fixed, adequate, fixed and adequate. Our unaccompanied homeless youth, we like to consider, we call them couch surfing, because basically they're just bouncing around from couch to couch with family members or friends. Perfect. So they're on their own, and they end up in these situations because of family conflicts or crisis that might be occurring in the home. We do have a few that are there because parents have been incarcerated, substance abuse is prevalent, illness or death of family, or illness or death of parents or legal guardians. Foster care, if a student chooses to age out of foster care at 18 and they do not have a regular residence, then we identify them as McKinney-Vento. Their family also might be homeless on their own. So if a family is homeless, sometimes it's easier for our unaccompanied homeless youth to find other places to reside. A lot of our unaccompanied homeless youth have been asked to leave a home, and that can be due to conflicts or crisis that might be occurring. Or they can choose to just leave the home on their own because of safety issues. And then finally, some of our students have been abandoned by their family members. So the purpose of the McKinney-Vento Act is to ensure that students that are identified as homeless receive equal educational experiences as students that are not experiencing these situations. So this act makes sure that they receive a free, appropriate public education. If they are identified as homeless, they must be enrolled in school immediately. And this is even if they are lacking documents that are usually required. And this includes birth certificates, immunization records, health forms. While they're enrolled and attending classes, Shannon and I will assist schools with obtaining those records. They receive transportation to and from their school of origin. And so school of origin refers to where the student currently resides. So for example, if a student is identified as being homeless in Buncombe County school systems and they receive permanent housing in Asheville City schools, then we are required by law to provide them transportation and to keep them in their school of origin, even if they are outside of their district. And I forgot to mention that once you're identified as McKinney-Vento through the school year, it continues until the very last day. So if a student is identified in August in family and they find permanent housing, then they continue to be identified just so that we can provide that continued support and services to make sure that they maintain permanent housing. And then just like I said earlier, they receive educational services that are comparable to those students and peers that are not in their same situation. So we make sure that they can still be available for IEP services, 504 plans, anything like that, that every other student has the right to. So with that definition, and I know there's a lot there, and we did open up time for questions and discussions at the end for any questions that might be, for any questions that you might have regarding that definition and the services that we provide. But with the definition, the definition for McKinney-Vento spans across all school districts in every state in the United States. And so that's very consistent. But what happens is when you start looking at numbers and data and how the program is ran, then it becomes different across districts. So I broke out numbers of our identified students and their demographics for Asheville City and Buncombe County schools, just to kind of give you a better overview of what it looks like for each district. So for our identified students, I provided the past 4 years of data. And then I added also this current school year. For Asheville City schools, we currently have 148 students that are identified. And if you look at our total number of students for the 2020-2021 school year, that was 155. So we're very close to meeting that number already, and we're only halfway through the semester, halfway through the school year. Buncombe County currently has 355 students identified. For our unaccompanied homeless youth, we also kind of break this down for them as well, just so we can see what it looks like in our districts for those students in our most vulnerable population. For Asheville City Schools, we have 16 unaccompanied homeless youth currently identified, and for Buncombe County, they currently have 42. We can get to the next slide. Oh, thank you. And so like I was saying, when you're comparing data across school systems, of course, it's going to be broken up a little bit differently. So for Asheville City Schools, if we want to break it up into age groups, we do pre-K through 5th. Middle school is considered 6th through 8th. High school is 9th through 12th. And then we're also required to identify birth through 5. And then when we're looking at Buncombe County schools, they identify just a little bit differently when they break it up. They do K through 6, middle is 7th through 8th. Their high school is 9th through early college, and then they also do birth through 5. And I provided data just of our identifications for the past 2 school years, and then this current one. So we break our demographics up into the current situation. And like I said, most of our students are identified in Asheville City Schools and Buncombe County Schools are doubled up. And again, this is because due to economic hardships or just the loss of housing, and they're living with family members or friends of the family. And so that's where most of our students come from, our identification comes from. So currently we have 135 students who are doubled up. We also look at hotel and motel situations. We do shelter, and then our unsheltered are those students that are identified as living in cars, campgrounds, and that uninhabitable type of housing where they might be lacking water or electricity. And when you look over at Buncombe County Schools numbers, they're pretty comparable to what we're seeing in Asheville City Schools as well. And then finally, we wanted just to provide the BIPOC numbers. So this is Black, Indigenous, Persons of Color. And this is kind of where you see a major difference between the city schools and Buncombe County schools. Last year, 92% of our students that were identified as McKinney-Vento identified as BIPOC, whereas that looks like 46% for Buncombe County schools. Bingo, perfect. And so I'm going to pass this on to Shannon and let her talk about the available funding that we have for our programs.
All right, thank you. So yeah, federal funding, we have a couple of sources for funding. The federal funding comes based on the number of students that we identify. And so it's a 3-year grant, sub-grant that we receive. And so like Asheville City would receive $30,000 for the 3 years that they were awarded federal funding. And then Buncombe County, of course, would receive the $45,000, and that's based on the number of students that we identify within a school year. We also, as of a couple of months ago, are receiving some American Rescue Plan funds, and those funds will be available to us until September of 2024. The thing with the federal funding, you look at those numbers, especially the ARP funds, and it's like this great amount of specific we can spend those funds. And so when we think of families being needing assistance with rent, or needing help with maybe a security deposit, or needing to stay in a hotel motel, those federal funds cannot be used for any of that. So we did get on the PRC 184 funds, we did just get some information that we could spend a small amount on maybe a 3-day hotel stay. So that's exciting for us. So, because we've never been able to do that. So, but those funds are available to our students that are identified as McKinney-Vento, and that's just funding to be able to remove any barrier that's in the way of their education. So Jessica and I both have some non-federal funding that we have applied for. I have applied through the Buncombe County Schools Family Resource Center, and Jessica through doing that on her own and being awesome. So she applied for those funds. And those are the things that we have been granted. And those are funds that we can use for hotel stays, for helping with rental assistance, also purchasing a bed or a mattress, or if we purchase sleeping bags, air mattresses, anything to help our homeless families with needs that they have. Also in the chat, I'm going to put a list of this is not all of them, but what we were working on the past couple of days, just some of the agencies that we work really, really closely with. And so while we still refer to ABCCM and Eblin for all of their services, we do have some federal funding right now, or non-federal funding, that we can use to help support our families. And you can go to the next slide. So services that are provided with McKinney-Vento federal funding, just transportation, school materials. We pay for tutors, case managers, caps and gowns, bus passes, field trips, and then professional development for Jessica and myself, or our school social workers who work really closely with our families and who are vital in making those McKinney-Vento referrals to us. And next slide, please. All right. So these are other services that are provided, and that's through that non-federal funding. We fund the Buncombe County Schools Family Resource Center. Jessica and I, we do totally opposite, different things. So I have services within Buncombe County that serve Buncombe County students and families, and then Jessica has services within Asheville City that serves her students and families. We are two separate identity, we do the same thing, but we're separate. So we do provide food boxes and clothing and diapers, hygiene, laundry detergent, furniture, bedding, we assist with finding financial assistance for rent, deposits, utilities. Jessica and I both have a memorandum of understanding with the Housing Authority of Asheville. And that works really well with our families who agree to work with Jessica and myself. Once they receive permanent housing, we would work with them for a year once they move into permanent housing. We have seen that happen. And so that's really been a really great collaboration with the Housing Authority. We collaborate with local organizations and agencies, a lot of faith-based organizations. Biltmore Church, Brookstone Church are huge partners with us. And we also use the non-federal funding for professional development, and then just linking students and families to services based on their needs. Food stamps, mental health services, birth certificates, federal documents. Families, when they come in to the center to work with us, we do an intake. We make sure all of their, when they leave the center, we make sure all of their needs are met. And all right, I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Shannon. So we have provided just a couple of stories from our families, and honestly, we could provide hundreds, but we wanted to give you just an idea of what it looks like for our families in Buncombe County and Asheville City Schools. And honestly, these stories make it a little bit more real. The first one, we have a family of 6 I'm currently working with. They've been living in a hotel since basically COVID happened. They are still living there because, there's just no available housing as of right yet. They have been approved for an apartment with the Housing Authority, but like I said, there's just nothing yet. So they are just kind of still, waiting in the hotel motel situation that they're in. We can get to the next slide. And then we also have students, some of our unaccompanied homeless youth that are migratory youth. They come up here and they work to financially support their families back in, Guatemala is where the student is from. They take care of themselves, but we also provide them assistance with obtaining driver's license and IDs. And sometimes we work on getting their original birth certificates up here and assisting them with caps and gowns and anything that they might need to graduate and be successful, even though they are up here living on their own and doing everything that we do all day long, plus going to school. And the next slide, please. And finally, just kind of a typical situation that we see with our unaccompanied homeless youth, family members or students having conflict and crisis in their house and they're asked to leave and they just kind of have to do it on their own. And so those are a lot of our situations that we see with them as well. But like I said, these are just 3 stories out of hundreds that we could provide. And Matthew, when I was putting this together, he asked us to identify one of the biggest gaps that we see for our families and students experiencing homelessness. And honestly, it's affordable housing. That's why we're seeing these doubled up and tripled up situations, because there's just no housing available, or our families don't meet that high definition for homelessness. And so they don't necessarily qualifies for some of those programs through the federal government from the HUD side. So, sorry. So yes, and also our families, they come with eviction notice, or they come with evictions on their past history. They, some of them have criminal records, negative landlord histories, and so it just makes it very, very difficult to find stable housing for them. And so if you go to the next slide, that's kind of our presentation in a nutshell. It's, there's a lot to it, but if you guys have any questions or comments for us, we would love to provide more information.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Jessica, thanks, Shannon. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Parker, Amanda, any questions or comments that y'all have at this time?
No, just thank you for putting that together. Certainly learned a lot of stuff I didn't know in there. Certainly one of it's a sad topic, to say the least. But I appreciate what you guys do, and hopefully this is something I can come back to and reference in the future to answer those questions. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jessica and Shannon. I am really curious, based on the first story of the family who had past evictions and negative landlord history, how much have you seen that exacerbated during the pandemic in contributing to the high numbers of McKinney-Vento families?
Honestly, I'm not, for Asheville City Schools, I'm not seeing so many evictions. What I'm seeing is that kind of stallment and being able to get housing, because for so long, those evictions were not happening. And so
Right.
that almost just kind of backed us up. So we're seeing it take longer and longer for families that do qualify for housing, actually have an available unit that becomes available.
Okay.
But as far as the negative landlord histories and evictions, Shannon and I work really, really hard to make sure that we find resources to prevent our families from being evicted. We also work on that side as well. So we really rely on our organizations here in Asheville City and Buncombe County. They're amazing, and we couldn't do what we do without them. So we've done a great job of trying to prevent those evictions and paying off those past debts that families might owe, so that they qualify.
Great, thank you.
I think one of the things we also see that we've been seeing in Buncombe County is a lot of those Section 8 or people selling those properties, and so people losing housing that way. We've seen quite that. So,
Brownie and Parker, that makes me wonder what opportunity there is to partner to keep folks in their housing during the pandemic with the funds that we do have available before they're evicted. So just something to think about. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate
Thank
y'all
you.
letting us have the chance to do this.
yes, thank
Hey,
you.
I have one question, Jessica, Shannon. Of the students and their families that are identified as McKinney-Vento, you may not have this exact number at your fingertips, but could you provide us with some estimate of, so they're all by definition experiencing some kind of housing insecurity or homelessness situation. What percentage of them over the course of a year, even though I understand technically they remain McKinney-Vento through the school year, but how many of them move from housing insecurity or homelessness as defined by that got them in that definition into, housing over the course of a year? I mean, is it most of them, or is it, or is the realities for what they're experiencing? I mean, the realities, it's more managing that reality as opposed to getting them into housing. What's the success rate in terms of moving those families or those kids into housing over the course of a year, a school year?
I think, for us in Buncombe County, oh, go ahead, Jessica.
No, go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, I think for us in Buncombe County, out of, let's say last year, I don't even know what that number was, but, maybe the sad part is maybe 20 families moved into permanent housing, 25 families, which is great. That's a great number, but we are seeing our families, the ones that are identified, they're being re-identified, each school year. So, and that's what's a lot of new last year, we are seeing a lot of new families this year.
I would say for Asheville City, it's about the same. We usually are able to find permanent housing for between, I would say, 30 to 40% of our families. We do see multiple families that will be on our list for years. And unfortunately, we also have families that obtain permanent housing and then they lose it again and they're back on our list. We do have a lot of new families. We have quite, it's very interesting. We have quite a Micronesian population that has come into the city. And so we're seeing a lot of new families, a lot of people moving their family members here right now, which is nothing I've seen in the past couple of years.
Okay, great. And then just one other question I would ask each of you, maybe just kind of like maybe a brief answer on this, but like if there's one or two things that Buncombe County could do, and maybe it's a policy or maybe it's a funding or whatever it is, however you'd like to answer it. If there's one or two things we could do to positively impact this part of our community and this set of issues, like what would you suggest we be thinking about?
I think, for Buncombe County, just sorry, Jessica. I think for Buncombe County, one of the things that is really hard for our families is a lot of families do not want to move into the city. They don't want to move into a lot of those, housing projects, those areas. And so a lot of our families will wait, they'll sit on the waiting list for a voucher or for the tenant-based vouchers. And so more, I think housing out in the county. So more of that affordable housing for our families to move into. So they're used to living, in that, in Leicester or in Inca or out in those areas. And that's where they have been born and raised, and they want to stay there. And there's just not enough housing for them.
And I would have to piggyback on the housing as well, but also just that awareness and just the awareness that this is occurring in, our city and our county, and that we do have these families that are struggling, and that, our numbers are going to continue to go up, due to COVID and the lack of affordable housing and that type of stuff. So.
Great. Hey, well, we really appreciate both of you taking time. It was really, really informative. So thank you guys so much for what you do and for taking time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So next up on our agenda is a follow-up on some of the questions that came up at our last meeting.
Yes. Good afternoon, commissioners.
Hey, Sybil.
Hi. So just want to follow up on a couple of questions that you had. Unfortunately, if you can go to the next slide, please. Unfortunately, we weren't able to answer all your questions. We're still working on one of the questions about the zip code, where folks had spent the night before. And our friends at the city are helping us gather that information. So, but I did want to go over these 4 questions that you had. The first one was about the screening process for voucher holders. And we did speak with an affordable housing provider, and they did share that their number one reason for denial is criminal history. So I did want to share that with you all. And we do have some data that we'll be forwarding on to you about that denial process. And when they do deny individuals for their housing, they do refer them to other opportunities. And then the third question about rapid rehousing.
Yes. Before we leave that, so is there anything else that you could say about when they say that they're referred to other housing opportunities? So, but what is that, right? Like, I mean, are people really stuck, or I mean, like what does that look like? If you've got, if you've got a criminal record, or if you've got some other stuff in your past that makes it really hard to pass one of these tenant screening, processes that an apartment developer or manager is going to have, like, are people really stuck, or are there some options out there that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is there are some people who are homeless, who are denied. And then I will need to follow up with the provider to determine exactly who they're referring to. But there are some providers that can help individuals with criminal history.
Well, I guess I would just say I'd like to kind of just continue, not at our meeting today, but just like I'd like to just kind of continue to kind of explore this and understand it in terms of like what the numbers are. I mean, is it a big percentage of folks that do get denied, or is it quite, small?
It's a small number. I think it was around 80% of the folks are approved, and then the remaining 20 are denied, and there's 3 categories for denial. And I have a table that I'm going to be forwarding you in an email. So I'm working with the provider to get that email together for you.
Okay. Well, that would be great, because it does seem like, I mean, as we think about, I mean, of course, there's just this huge need that, you know, we're talking about with our goals to build tons of affordable housing. There's tons of people who would, you know, not have an issue with a tenant screening application, but still there's no housing for them. But it does seem like for the folks who have challenges passing that, even as we build a lot more affordable housing, it does seem like a subset of folks that like is that very vulnerable to risk of homelessness, right? So I'd love to just kind of understand that piece of it more. So thanks for y'all starting to help us understand that more.
Yep. Yeah, as the more I delve into this, the more I see it's all, you know, interrelated here, in terms of affordable housing, homelessness, all of these processes interact. Questions number 3 and 4, you ask about number of individuals in rapid rehousing. Currently, there's 178. And then number 4 was permanent supportive housing. We currently have 581 units. And then, as you know, we have 185 planned that are going to be available 2023. Those are the homeward bound units, that's 85. And then Step Up has another 100. And of that 150 is for chronic, and then 50 are for veterans. And I put these 2 tables on here so that you could see a little bit more information about that. So again, we've got 581 existing units. We've got 135 planned units coming on board, and 50 of those I've pulled out separately as veterans. You'll see in that table. So we've got a total of 766 units. Of the 50 that are for veterans, if you look at the table for chronic homelessness, that 154 there, 20 of those chronic homeless individuals are going to be able to access, oh, can you go back? Thank you. Are going to be able to access those 50 veteran units. So we've really got, if I'm making sense, we've got 134 chronic individuals, once you take those 20 veterans out, who will be able to use those 134 units that are with Homeward Bound and Step Up. So my point with all this is that the minute that those permanent supportive units are built, they're filled up. So except for one, then we have a extra 1 unit. So there's not a lot of leeway in terms of permanent supportive housing, even once we get those new units online. Sorry, kind of complicated, but hopefully it made sense.
Yeah, although I mean that's like maybe, I mean, we're kind of a glass half full kind of take on it too, is that like, I mean, these numbers of course are never static, they're changing over time, but that these 2 important projects going forward do provide the additional permanent supportive housing units that are needed for a very high percentage of the identified need in the community too, true. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's the other way of looking at it. And as you said, you know, this 154 chronic homeless individuals, that number is going to change. We don't know. The point in time count, I believe, is next week. So, you know, it could go up, it could go down. We don't know.
Right.
Okay. So next slide, please. This, I just wanted to show you, we shared the slide with you at the last meeting. We did add the 766 units for permanent supportive housing and the 178 under rapid rehousing. I just wanted to share this with you. If you could go to the next slide. As we think about what our goals might be for homelessness, Matt and I have found this graphic to be helpful when thinking about where we might be able to impact the system from the Affordable Housing Services Program perspective. And so we've put at the bottom of the slide the various services that we provide and what areas that they can impact. So I just wanted to share that with you, kind of prompt you to start thinking about what some goals might be around homelessness. Any questions?
Doesn't sound like there's any right now. So thank you for the updates and follow-up.
All right. I think I've got the next item.
I guess, one thing, and I don't know, maybe if there's someone who can comment on this, during the meeting, or maybe it's maybe a follow-up thing. One of the things I would be interested in just learning more about is, I know that, the city's been the lead on this, so I'm not sure how much the county staff might be looped in on it, but on the Ramada Inn property, in the plans to move that forward with the, I'm sorry, I had this in my notes and you just showed it. What's the name of the organization again that's working on that?
Step Up.
Step Up, yeah. So I would just be interested in learning more about that model, right? Like, I think we all learned a lot about the Days In project because we were a big investor in it, and we, all done due diligence on that. And with the Step Up, the partnership between the city and Step Up moving ahead on that property, that kind of, they've probably been working on it, for a while, but we all just kind of learned about it more recently. So I would just be curious to just learn more about it. In terms of how that works, right? I think my understanding is there is, I don't know if this is formal or informal, but there's been some request about whether the county can financially, be a partner at some level on that project. I know there's been conversations about that. I don't know if that's in the form of any kind of formal written proposal to the county at this point or not, but it's in the context of the totality of the project, it's, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying I'd like to understand how it financially works, right? We were talking about potentially investing very large sums of money between, various partners around low barrier shelter at that facility, and now there's kind of this different plan. And so anyway, I would love to kind of understand more about how that's all working, whether the county ends up being a big or minor financial partner in it or not, just since it's an important project to understand how are they pulling that off.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right. If there's no other questions, are we ready to move on to the next agenda item?
I've got a quick question for Sybil. Sybil, you mentioned at the end there, in terms of sparking a discussion or us thinking about goals for homelessness. Are you suggesting that kind of each of those columns or categories in that flow chart needs to have its own goal, or?
No, I wasn't suggesting that, but
okay,
of course,
okay.
everything's on the table.
Okay.
I was thinking in terms of the programming that we provide. So for example, tenant-based rental assistance and emergency repair, if there are changes or improvements or whatnot that you want to do to any of the programs that we're already offering, that's more what I was thinking. But
okay,
of course, if we can talk about this in a very broad sense as well. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of asked that because I still haven't formed just in my own head how to think about how to tackle these goals in terms of quantities and categories of need. And so, okay, that helps me.
Yeah.
That's all I got, Brownie.
Cool. All right, so next up is a further kind of review around voucher data in the community and how these programs are working in Buncombe County. This is a follow-up on some previous discussions we've had on this topic to better understand it and the role that vouchers play and could play in addressing these challenges going forward. So Sybil, is this you as well?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. So as the chairman mentioned, we had two previous presentations on vouchers, one from Kate Pett and then also from David Nash from the Housing Authority. And staff had some questions, and I believe commissioners had a few questions. So I wanted to try to address those and then ask you all if you are interested in creating a goal around vouchers, or if that's something that you feel that our rental goal would meet. So that's kind of the question for this presentation. Of course, you don't need to make a decision today, but would love to hear your thoughts. So if we can go to the next slide. So I did reach out to David. He was incredibly helpful in helping me pull all this together. And I did ask him, what are the barriers to vouchers? And he named three primary barriers. One is the low monthly payments, and of course, the Housing Authority is, always in the process of trying to increase those payments as the market changes. And the second one is housing discrimination, and that is managed through the state. They manage the fair housing regulation. And then the third one is really the one that we're going to spend most of the time talking about today, and that's the lack of units. So I want to answer how many vouchers are authorized for Buncombe County at the federal level, and how many are not able to be used. And that's really the voucher gap. And then in addition to the gap, there's also a wait list. So it's really the gap plus the wait list that gives you the need for these vouchers. And then that's the ultimate question is, what is the need for vouchers for individuals at 50% AMI and below? So next slide. So the federal government provides 3,414 vouchers for Buncombe County. That's the total of both of these charts. The chart on the left is really what we're going to spend time talking about today, and that's the public housing voucher program. We have around 1,500 vouchers for public housing. And then the tenant-based voucher program, that's the program where individuals can work with a private landlord to get housing. And there's around a little over 1,300 vouchers in that program. The column to the right is specialized groups who receive vouchers. And I'm not going to talk about that one at all. I don't know too much about that. So next slide. So this really just shows you that the voucher gap that we're talking about is this 400 units. For public housing vouchers, our public housing facilities are filled 100%. Of course, there's always days where people are moving in, people are moving out, so it's not technically 100%, but essentially, if you have a voucher for public housing, then you have a place in public housing. The tenant-based voucher program, that's where the gap really comes into play, where there's individuals who have a voucher, but who are unable to find housing. And that's that 400 number.
Sybil, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
On this slide? So the public housing voucher program of 1,525, is it correct? Does that mean that in essence, there are 1,525 apartment units that are Housing Authority apartments, and those are all kind of by definition voucher units?
Yes, that's the way I understand it. Yes.
Right.
So most of these 400 individuals who have a voucher, they're actually in public housing, and they've been given a voucher to move out of public housing and into a privately owned unit. And it usually takes them 3 to 6 months to find housing. So next slide, please. So this slide is all about the wait list. So it's not just the unused vouchers that show the need, it's also the wait list. So David has 819 units are needed for the public housing wait list. So that's 819 people who want to get into public housing. But what he's told me is that at any given time, if you were to call up someone on that wait list, half of the individuals on that wait list have already found housing or moved or whatnot. So what the need really is at any given moment, it's about half of that 819, which is 410 units. Same for tenant-based wait list. There's around 2,248 units needed, but at any given time, about half of those folks have moved on. So there's a need of 1,124 units. So at any given time on the wait list, there's a need of about 1,500 units. Next slide. So just some key takeaways. Again, that voucher gap is 400 units. That's 400 vouchers where units can't be found. If you add that to the 1,500 on the roughly 1,500 people on the wait list at any given time who need a unit, you're around 2,000 units being needed. So, and one thing David really wanted me to emphasize was the rental goal that we have for 1,500 units. would have a huge impact on this need. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, and this is kind of item number 4 here, is that these are the tax credit projects really provide this long-term stable affordability. An individual landlord can come in and out of accepting vouchers, but tax credit projects are required to accept vouchers, and so they are a more stable option. However, as we heard from, I think it was Shannon with the county today, she mentioned that individuals out in the county, they want to live out in the county. They want to live in, a single family residence. They're not interested necessarily in living, in a multifamily unit in the city limits. And that is true. Most households prefer the tenant-based rental program. And also research does show that living in a mixed area of diverse incomes has benefits beyond for those households. So there's kind of a pros and cons associated with, the individual landlords versus our tax credit projects.
Well, a bit Sybil, isn't it true that the vast majority of the tenant-based voucher tenants are tenants in multifamily tax credit projects? Like that probably is like the vast majority of where those tenant-based voucher folks live. They may or may not be in the city limits. I mean, some of them are, some of them aren't, but a lot of those tenant vouchers are in apartments, right? Not single family homes.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I would have to ask David about that.
Yeah, maybe let's definitely have that as kind of a follow-up question. I mean, from I was just having a conversation with one of the MHO folks, and they said that like about half of all the residents of all the various tax credit projects that have been developed over many years, again, some of which are in the city, some of which are in the county, about half of their tenants are voucher holders. So a big percentage. I kind of interpreted that comment earlier a bit about like concerns around living in public housing as opposed to just necessarily like multifamily housing per se, but that was just sort of my take on it. But I'm not sure, that could be a follow-up question too, I guess.
Okay.
All right.
And
great.
Is there one more, or is that it? I think there might be one more. This is just getting us to the question of whether you want to set a separate goal for vouchers, or if you feel like the rental unit goal captures or impacts the need there. You'll see here, the need for the essentially 2,000 units that's captured in the under 50% AMI income categories there. That's the red rectangle. So if you're interested in setting a separate goal, we have one in red outlined here below. So I'll leave that discussion for you all to talk through.
Great. Maybe leave that last slide up. Yeah, leave that slide up. That's great. All right, Sybil. Thank you so much. Great presentation. Parker, Amanda, questions, comments, thoughts?
I mean, one reaction I have to the idea of a voucher goal, is that I really think we should at least try and entertain the idea and spend a little money on expanding the availability of voucher rental units, throughout the county, expanding the quantity of existing kind of housing stock that landlords are providing for these types of individuals. I think there's at least one program like that, in the city of Asheville right now, because it's the cheapest and the quickest way to get people into housing. And so whether that needs to be in the form of a goal, I don't know. But I definitely think it's something we should be trying.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we're kind of leaving 400 vouchers on the table, and we know that like again, we'll talk more about these different kinds of, developments that can be built to over time kind of make up a lot of that need. But like, they all cost, they're all significant in terms of the resources to bring new construction units online. So if there is a way to get existing landlords to participate, then that seems really cost effective, even though I certainly hear David's point around like these big tax credit projects are great because you can just, once they're built, you can count on them, for decades to come in terms of being apartment managers that'll accept vouchers. So I think in the long run, that definitely seems like the main strategy is like, we need to build more of these kind of, significant projects that will be permanently supportive of vouchers. But if there's anything we can do along the way to encourage more landlords to participate out in the marketplace, that seems like, it's maybe something of a niche in the big picture of things, but it could be a really good niche to build out in a pretty cost-effective way. So I'm definitely supportive of that. And it does seem like, it doesn't need to necessarily be too complicated, but if we're currently literally leaving like 400 or so vouchers on the table each year because there's not enough units for various reasons, then having some kind of, my hope is that this certainly wouldn't take until 2030 to solve this, but like maybe some shorter term goal around trying to, as the staff outlined in red, like having a number of different strategies or tactics or projects so that we can 100% utilize our community's allocation of vouchers each year. To try to achieve that as soon as we can seems like an excellent focus to me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Shannon Boyd really did echo a lot of what I've heard lately, though, is that it does seem like we really are focusing on specifically within the city of Asheville and forgetting about our families who live in the county and do have transportation and aren't necessarily relying on public transportation to get where they're going. So I would be curious to know, of those folks who are on the voucher wait list, are they specifically waiting to live within the city limits? Are there more opportunities to expand into the county to take into account? I just want to make sure as we're looking at this that we're treating all folks who have affordable housing needs with dignity and respect, and not forcing them to move into a place that maybe doesn't suit their family or their needs, or pulling their children out of, a school system that they've grown up in. So thinking of it a bit more holistically in terms of what suits everyone. And I know we can't suit everyone, but just really thinking through being respectful of the needs of those who are in that under 50% AMI rental need.
Yeah.
I think I said that at one point when we were discussing Ferry Road, that it's nice to be able to look at, this really beautiful property for folks who have affordable housing needs and not, and allowing them to have access to parkway, the greenways and that kind of thing. So to me, that just really ties into that. I just want to ensure that we're looking at all the folks and their needs.
Yeah. I think along the same lines, also interesting to kind of look at like where are all of the tenant-based rental projects in Buncombe County, like inclusive of within the city limits as well as the entire county, like maybe there's, I'm not trying to put like make a lot of work for someone, but I wonder if there's some way that could be kind of shown either just numerically or visually, like on a map, because my sense is that while maybe there is kind of a proportionately more of them inside the city, that there are, a number of them outside the city, but it'd be interesting to kind of see that, just kind of see that visually. I mean, some of the ones we've recently supported, of course, were like, in Swannanoa, in South Buncombe, but outside the city limits, so there are a number of them, that have come online recently or planned that are not all in the city limits, but it would be interesting to see how well distributed they are throughout the county. And I definitely agree with Amanda that as we think about the future, we need a countywide strategy for this, right? It needs to be there's a need for this in all parts of the county for for sure. Any other questions or thoughts from the committee members right now on vouchers? Oh, I did have one other specific question. I was making notes here. Do vouchers only, do you have to be 50% AMI or below to apply for a voucher? I saw some things that made me think that might be the case, but I wasn't sure. Like, what are the income qualification criteria you need to be able to apply for a voucher?
Yes, so I did ask David that question. It is 50% AMI and below.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, here's one other question I wrote down in my notes, and this may be kind of a longer term thing. Again, it doesn't seem like we're in any risk of getting into this situation really soon, but just sort of to understand how the programs work. So there's waiting lists, like there's a huge waiting list for tenant-based vouchers. There's also a waiting list for Asheville Housing Authority vouchers within their own, developments and neighborhoods. Theoretically, like let's say we're 5 years down the road and we've built a lot of these, additional apartments that take vouchers, and so we've solved for this like 400 unit issue not being utilized. Those are being utilized. We've worked through the wait list a lot. And a lot of the folks, here's the scenario. Like if a lot of folks who were on the wait list or are current housing authority residents moved to use the tenant-based vouchers, right? So they're now living in some different neighborhood. And there's not a big wait list for housing authority apartments. With the new residents who do move into the housing authority apartments, would they be holders? My question is, like, if you live in a housing authority apartment, are you by definition a voucher holder, or is it only some subset of those residents who put themselves on a voucher list, become voucher holders? I guess I'm still a little unclear about the overlap between residents of housing authority neighborhoods and voucher and being a voucher holder. To me, I'm still a little bit, I don't quite understand how that works. If those are almost like synonymous terms, or in fact, there's some distinctions there that exist. I may not be very clear on this, Sybil.
No, so my understanding is they are synonymous.
Okay.
So yeah, but I'm no expert. I leaned heavily on David for this, and I was hoping he could be here, but I don't think he could make it.
I guess really kind of where that question's going is, like, if in the long run, if we're experiencing success in growing the supply, is the amount of vouchers that Buncombe County will be eligible for and approved for, is that likely to remain a pretty static number into the future? Or if our supply actually grew and we weren't kind of not able to utilize what we're already allocated, would it grow, or does it kind of just grow based on your population growth and things like that?
That's a good question. And as I put in the slides, David did say that number, that the authorized number has not increased in a very long time. And I don't know what the process is for going back and getting authorization for a higher number of vouchers. That would be something he would have to answer.
Okay. Well, maybe
yes, theoretically, that is a ceiling, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much for spending more time on this. This has been really helpful at this meeting and the last couple of meetings that we've been spending time on the voucher programs.
Okay. Real quick, I did want to kind of recap what I heard. I am hearing more about having tactics or programming around vouchers versus a goal at this point, and an interest in developing some sort of landlord incentive program with focus on the areas in the county at this point. And I will say, so that's definitely something that we can encourage. We do have obviously an open application right now. So we will encourage applicants to apply for some sort of landlord incentive program. And I did look into other counties who are doing this. Orange County does have an incentive program. It's about $1,000 per landlord. And then Wake County also has one. It's $750 incentive. So
if we wanted to support some work in that area, would it have to come from like the New Start program, or is there any other kind of category that we could theoretically put some resources behind this? I mean, it's not exactly the same thing as tenant-based rental assistance, although in a way it kind of has some similarities in terms of the practical implications of it.
yes.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, at this point, the New Start would be where we would steer folks. The cap is $25,000 on that. So that would be a limitation in terms of funding.
Okay. All right. I would say, you know, just kind of going back to the question about a goal, like, you know, I mean, again, you know, we're going to talk about goals in just a second. And I do, you know, I'm kind of eager to, you know, kind of elevate some of those conversations to the commission level. I think there will be more goals that we set over time, maybe some around homelessness, perhaps as we further kind of review that topic. I mean, I would say I'd be open to us creating some kind of goal if the staff wanted to kind of think about this around like a shorter term time frame around steps we can take to kind of fully deploy our community's allocation of vouchers. Like, I don't know, maybe that's a 3 or 4 year goal or something in that time frame horizon, but I would be open to that. It does seem like such low hanging fruit and something that we could realistically take on and accomplish on a shorter time frame than this big, you know, some of these bigger 2030 goals. Although I think that most of the tactics we would use to get there are probably very aligned with those longer term goals. So I'm open to that. Parker, Amanda, any other thoughts around that question?
Yeah, I agree. I see no reason not to have, you know, if we go down this road, not to just kind of have a goal to zero out our unit need within the voucher category over X amount of years. It's just again the cheapest way to do any of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, great. Well,
Thank you.
if the staff want to kind of think about that, maybe come back with some thoughts on that at subsequent meetings, that'd be great. All right. Okay. Well, if we're done with the voucher, the next item is to go back, and this is part of our kind of ongoing conversation around goals and policies. And I did want to have a presentation I'd like to kind of walk through around that. Before we get into that, part of the question too, I think is the question around the timing and the sequence we want to have from our committee level and the commission, right? So I think ultimately our hope is that we bring some recommendations from our committee to the county commission. This is like a big priority for the county commission as a whole. So we want to make sure we, we have a good process on this. Normally with issues like this, we typically have a briefing meeting where we talk about it, let the commission kind of ask questions, have discussion, and then at a subsequent meeting, we might take it up for more formal consideration and a possible vote on policies. So we were actually going to have an initial briefing discussion at our commission meeting, the briefing meeting this afternoon, but those have been canceled due to weather concerns and a lot of COVID concerns as well. So we're not having a meeting today. We could, and we can kind of come back to this question after we go through the conversation over this presentation about, when do we want to bring this forward? Do we want to look towards having an initial briefing meeting at our next commission meeting, which would be on February 1st? And then with an eye towards, we could put it on the subsequent meeting after that for commission consideration and potential votes. Anyway, but let's come back to what we think is the right timing around kind of advancing some of this as we go through the presentation, see what areas we feel like we're all pretty, we feel like they're ready to go, and what areas might we might want to have some more time for further discussion and due diligence around. All right, so Matt, are you gonna advance the slides for me?
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, let's just go to the first slide, or the next slide rather. All right. I'm sorry, could you go back one? Yeah, thanks. So as we've talked about, our committee's been reviewing these goals, and these are actually goals we have already endorsed. So the goal around 2,800 will impact 2,800 affordable housing units by 2030. That includes the 1,500 affordable rental units that average 60% AMI, 400 ownership goals for home ownership goals, home ownership units for households below 80% AMI, 500 home repair projects, and then 400 additional units. It could be a combination of rental and home ownership that are workforce units between 80 and 120% AMI. So, and all of this by 2030. So next slide. And Parker and Amanda or staff, if anybody has any questions and stuff, feel free to just, raise them as we go through this. So I worked on this presentation. Part of it was, I sometimes find doing this kind of useful to kind of organize my own thoughts around this too. But, as we've thought about the goals, we've also started to, think more about like, well, how, what are possible different scenarios for how we can increase our investment to achieve these goals. And one of the ideas that we've started talking about is a housing bond referendum, which could be, a very powerful resource to apply to this. But there are some other, strategies we have as well that we could deploy in the interim between now and when a bond might come in to take place, or even if a bond takes place, which would require voter approval. So purpose of this presentation was to kind of think about our goals, think about different financing strategies that we could consider to provide the resources to meet these goals. I wanted to share a few additional thoughts around some of the county-owned land assets we have that could be contributed to the affordable housing goals, share a few thoughts about the role they might play financially and in terms of just the number of units that might be realistically possible to locate on some of these properties. So the role that they would play in these goals, and then we'll have some further discussion about the recommendations for these strategies for the commission to consider and our committee to consider. So next slide, please. We've talked about this a lot. The scope of the need is very large. The percentage of households that are cost burdened in the county is very significant. The Bowen report indicated there's over 7,000 households that are severely cost burdened in our community. A big need for especially efficiency in 1-bedroom units, but also 2- and 3-bedroom units for families for larger families. Matt, I had a follow-up email question for Matt about some of the scope of need before our meeting. And Matt, could you remind us that email that you circulated this week, the number of affordable rental units that the Bowen report identified as being needed? Could you remind us of that kind of key figure again?
Yes, so and I apologize because I can't pull up my screen where I have the exact number while I'm sharing this screen due to the nature of this particular meeting. But it's just over 3,100 units for the less than 80% AMI group. And then there's another 900 and a little over 900 units for the traditionally referred to as workforce housing group. So it's around 4,100 total rental gap need across 0 to 120% AMI.
Great, thank you. And that's just for the rental units. That doesn't look at the home ownership, affordable home ownership needs.
Correct. And actually, it may be easier here. Let's just go back. So you can actually see those gaps on this slide on the right in the tables. So 3,198 unit reference there. And then the ownership are obviously listed separately in terms of needs from the Bowen report on this slide.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And part of what kind of makes me think is like, while these goals that we're setting are, I think, really good goals and ambitious, they won't meet the full need, although they do meet a significant percentage of it, right? Like if we can meet these goals, it would make a huge, huge difference in terms of this part of the affordable housing need in the community. So it's exciting from that standpoint. So next slide. All right, so the county's currently, this is kind of looking at like, what are we doing now? And like, what are the opportunities to build on that? So the county's currently investing about $2.5 million annually from our general budget into our Affordable Housing Services Fund. So if we simply maintain the status quo between now and 2030, like we will invest from our general fund about $20 million into affordable housing over the next 8 years or so. There's also community development block grant funding, home funding, ARPA funding out there that's not counted in those figures. With the funds we're investing now, as we've discussed at recent meetings, like we're basically able to build, we're able to enable, or it's possible to enable about 125 new units to be built each year. That's not just rental, it also includes like the homeownership, Habitat for Humanity, those types of projects. So if we just continue what we're doing now, we could realistically build around 1,000 new units by 2030. So, but we have this, this goal to expand that to at least 1,500 new affordable apartments, 400 new homeownership, and 400 workforce units. So 2,300 is the goal. So one question is like, is it possible to potentially achieve this new goal if there weren't a bond referendum? So that's part of what I wanted to sort of explore further in this presentation. So next slide. One of the tools that we have in our toolbox to potentially help address this need are our existing county-owned land assets, which we've talked about some, and we've already gotten approval to begin the exploration of development on 4 specific properties on Cox Avenue, Woodfin, Valley Street, and Ferry Road. So this chart, provides kind of a high-level thought about, how many units could potentially be supported on these different properties. And there's a lot of different assumptions that go into that. I would argue that these are conservative assumptions, and a couple of slides after this will kind of explore why that's the case. But for the sake of conversation, if you assume that you could build 1,000 units total between now and 2030 on these properties, then and you assume, since one of the biggest challenges with affordable housing development in our area is that land is very expensive, the cost of land for new sites. If you assign a value of $1,500 per unit that we're contributing in this land assets that we already own, then that would be a real estate contribution towards this overall effort of about $15 million. So, a significant and meaningful contribution in terms of basically land that's already paid for by the taxpayers that could be used as sites for this. So let's go to the next slide, and this will kind of walk through in the following slides, like a little bit more exploration of that. But before we go there, this slide kind of outlines, some of the different most significant options we may have in lieu of doing a bond to increase funding for affordable housing prior to passage of a bond referendum. So this just paints kind of one scenario, and there could be many variations of this, but it's one I just kind of wanted to lay out as kind of for conversation as a potential scenario. So if the county increased our current funding from $2.5 million a year to $3.8 million a year from our general fund, and we index that for inflation by 2.5%, we, in our early childhood education fund, we also have an index for inflation, so it grows over time and doesn't deteriorate as inflation reduces the value of money over time. That step would produce about $12 million of additional revenue between now and 2030. The second step would be if we are successful in developing the number of units on our county-owned land as identified in the previous slide, that could be a contribution of around $15 million of real estate assets towards the goals. And then the other tool we currently have now, which is unique, is that we do have the ARPA funding. We've currently invested about $7.5 million of our ARPA funding towards affordable housing and homelessness related projects. If we invest an additional 7.5 million from our remaining unallocated funds in the next round, that would be a total investment of $15 million. So the combination of those three opportunities in this particular scenario would increase funding by $42 million above and beyond what we're already doing, for a total investment of $62 million between now and 2030. So this is just one scenario, could be many more that could produce more or less revenue, but I wanted to kind of put this forward as kind of one scenario to think about in terms of our goals and how far that might be able to take us. Next slide. So just kind of thinking more about some of these county-owned properties. Several of them are in the downtown area, as well as Ferry Road, which is more rural and suburban. This slide is an image of the Vanderbilt Apartments, which is kind of historic affordable housing development in our downtown property. I just kind of wanted to have this slide to kind of illustrate, you know, the idea of building housing in downtown is not new. It's been happening a long time. This is one example of a project in our community. 123 apartments on just a half an acre of land. So at a density of 246 units per acre. And these are all efficiency and one-bedroom apartments for seniors. So just kind of as an illustration of, like, you know, this is a relatively small piece of property in our downtown and how many units it supports. Next slide. Thank you. A more recent example of infill development downtown would be the Eagle Marketplace Apartments, which was built just a few years ago. So these are 62 units plus some commercial space on the first floor. So a total of 62 apartments located on about a half an acre of land as well. So a density of about 116 units per acre, and reflects kind of more contemporary infill development in the downtown setting. Next slide. Another fairly recent development just outside downtown in the River Arts District would be the Glen Rock Apartments, affordable apartments, 85 apartments on 1.4 acres. So less dense development, but still about 60 units per acre outside of downtown in the city. Next slide. Y'all probably, many people saw this in the newspaper. This is a private sector development in downtown, 80 micro units on less than 2/10 of an acre. So interesting project, like a density of 444 units per acre in this private sector initiated development. This is just off Cox Avenue near some of the county properties. Next slide. So the three properties in the downtown area that the county's identified, again, Cox Avenue, Valley Street, and Woodfin. This slide just shows the locations of where these different parcels are. Some of them are actually multiple parcels located next to each other. Next slide. So the Cox Avenue property specifically is 1.7 acres. It's actually 4 different but adjoining parcels on or near Cox Avenue. And this slide just reflects, like, you know, if you built infill development, just for sort of illustrative purposes, if you built infill development on this property similar to the Vanderbilt Apartments, you could actually build over 700 apartments on this property. And I'm not saying that that's the right development solution for this particular property, but just to kind of make the point that there is a lot of potential infill development property depending on, you know, the design and development strategies on the property. In the slide I showed earlier, you know, the working assumption I had for that slide is that there would only be 200 affordable apartments built on these properties. But you know, the theoretical development potential is actually quite a bit more than that. Next slide. And this is just another. This is from the county GIS, zeroing in on one of the parcels on Cox Avenue, 50 Cox Avenue, right across from the county bus station. So next slide. And just also go back one, just also to reflect, you know, the presentation kind of has this assumption around $15,000 value per unit, but this particular parcel has a value, an appraised value, according to the county, of $2.4 million. So also, if you just look at the appraised values of these properties, they are also very similar to the $15 million level. So a couple different ways of thinking about the property value we could be contributing and they both arrive around that, $13 to $15 million range of what we'd be contributing in real estate. Next slide. Again, this is just the Cox Ave. These are the 4 parcels on Cox Avenue. Next slide. And then this is the Valley Street property where the county's planning department is currently located, but the plans are to relocate the planning department, some of the other operations there. And I guess the point I wanted to show with this slide is that a lot of this is a pretty big parcel for the downtown area. And a lot of it is surface parking as well. Next slide. This is just the same parcel taken, the photograph taken from the street level. Next slide. And the other property the county has agreed to review is this is the I'm forgetting the address off the top of my head, and I don't have it on the slide, but this is the parking lot in front of the Family Justice Center facilities. And for the purposes of this conversation, I assume that not all these sites are successfully developed. So for the purposes of, for the sake of conversation, I assume this property is not developed between now and 2030, since, development's always hard. And, there's no reason to believe that, every single one of these properties will end up being successfully developed in the short term, although they might be. Next slide. And last, but of course, most significant is the Ferry Road property, which is 137 acres total, and has about 60 acres of land where the topography is suitable for development. So, the potential for significant multifamily as well as single family or small multifamily development, as we've discussed at several of our recent commission planning sessions around this property has an appraised value of $7.1 million according to the county. So potentially significant site for our affordable and workforce goals, including home ownership and rental. Next slide. And this is the same slide that we just looked at before, just to kind of come back to it and think about it, after looking at each of the properties and their development potential. Developing 1,000 units on these different properties might sound really ambitious, but I think as we look at what's really possible in each of them, I think that's actually probably a very conservative goal ultimately, if these properties are redeveloped. What the mix is of affordability, workforce, or just market rate, of course, those are all questions that would need to be discussed and decided further as we go through the development process. Next slide. All right. So this portion of the presentation is I basically wanted to run some different kind of high level scenarios around what it might look like over a period of years for us to try to reach some of these new goals that the county commission and our committee are talking about in terms of the rental apartment development, the home ownership, the home repair, looking at what we're spending now and what it might take to achieve some of these goals. So this is going to kind of just run through a couple of different scenarios. As with any of these kind of models, there's a lot of assumptions in here. So I'll try to share what some of the key assumptions are in here, some of which could be, I think could be considered conservative, but there could be different assumptions used as well, of course, as we go through this. So this first slide is looking at what it might take for the county to meet our goals for affordable home ownership, 400 units, the 400 workforce units, and the home repair goals. So basically, these are all the goals we have except for the affordable rental apartments, which we'll explore in more detail in other slides. So it's kind of looking at everything else. And a lot of the numbers that are in here are based on numbers that we've discussed at our previous Affordable Housing Committee meetings. Staff have shared around realistically, what does it cost to build some of these different types of units. So in the first category on the home ownership units, I think in one of our first meetings, the staff presentation indicated that an investment of $40,000 per unit, is probably realistic in terms of what it takes to make a unit affordable to someone below 80% AMI on average. So if we build 50 of those units per year between now and 2030, we will meet our goal of 400. So we would need to build 50 a year or support building 50 a year. And if they each cost on average $40,000 a year, then that total investment for the home ownership goal is going to be about $2 million per year. And this spreadsheet basically includes a 3% cost index for inflation every year, kind of consistently on all the different categories. So it starts off at 40,000 a year, but then goes up a little bit every year with 3% increase in costs. So the total would be a little over $17 million to reach the total goal between now and 2030. The workforce units, the same number, 50 per year to meet our 400 goal. Although actually, Matt, this is the place where the number is actually 500, not 400. Is that correct?
It's the home repair units.
I'm sorry.
Which the goal was set at 500.
The home repair. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. The workforce goal is 400 as well. So 50 per year gets us there. I think this is one area where we haven't, in our committee, discussed a specific number for what we think it will cost to bring these workforce units online. So this is a number that probably we need to spend some more time thinking about. But since this is this is for residents with an AMI of 80% all the way up to 120%, it will be a much lower number than what's needed to support homeownership for families that are 80% AMI and below. So the working assumption just for the spreadsheet was that it's 17,500 per unit. Initially goes up over time. If that's a valid assumption, then it would be 875,000 a year to start with, growing over time. So 7.7 million over the 8-year period. And then the last category is the home repair program, where it's a range of support that we provide from a few $1,000s up to over $10,000, but it's an average. It averages out at a lower number. So if we did 50 units a year to get to the goal and spent on average 4,500 per unit, this reflects those costs over time as well. So the bottom line on this is that the total investment under this set of assumptions to achieve all the goals but for affordable rental is $27.5 million. Of course, we work with many partners on these goals, the city, Dogwood, there's CDBG funding, home funding, there's other potential sources of funding. In this scenario, if the county's contribution towards meeting these housing goals was, our financial contribution was half of that total, then our portion would be $13.7 million of the $27 million. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the next couple of slides all are looking at the goal of 1,500 or 1,500 plus affordable rental units. This is, in many ways, the most ambitious part of the goals that we're considering, and the most resource intensive as well. So there's several slides that kind of look at how we might approach this and the financial investment needed to achieve it. And as we talked about at some of the recent meetings, a lot of what could be drivers on this is the percentage of projects that are either funded with tax credits or are not funded with tax credits. So these different scenarios kind of explore those different approaches. The first scenario is looking at what if all of these units, what if 100% of the units were developed using tax credits? And so the first column is the 9% program, of which we're very familiar because we get one of these done most every year in Buncombe County. They average around 80 apartments or thereabouts. So because the county is not the only partner in those projects, I don't count all 80 of those average size projects as just being ours, because the city supports them. The county doesn't always support every one of those projects financially. So So the working assumption here is like, what if we counted, 50 of those apartments as county supported projects as the average over this 8-year period? So 50 units per year through the 9% program, based on, projects that have been funded recently. There's the 9% program provides a lot of subsidy through tax equity, so it requires the least subsidy of really any of these kind of projects. So if you assume that we needed to invest $12,500 per unit for this 50 units, that's about $1 million. It's like if you had an 80 unit apartment project, that would be about $1 million, which is in the neighborhood of what the county invested in the most recent 9% project that came through our committee, which we approved funding for in 2021. So projects like that would need about $625,000 of county funding or local funding to do the 50 units. So that plays out over time. You need $5.5 million over the period of time to get 400 of those units built. If you build all of the remaining units through the 4% tax credit program, that'd be 138 units per year on average to get to 1,500 units between now and 2030. If you assume you need $35,000 on average as the local support for those projects, then the column on the far right is the total amount of money annually that would need to be invested to build that many units through the 4% program. This is also, kind of largely based on some of the numbers that we've discussed during previous presentations about this, but which are also very similar to the project that the county several of the projects the county recently funded that used a 4% program. So this is actually more funding than the county put into the recent project off of Hendersonville Road. So it's a little bit more per unit than that one, but similar. So with this scenario, if it was 100% tax credit funded, the total investment needed to get to the 1,500 units would be $48 million. If the county's role in that was providing half the funding, it'd be about $24 million. That plus the $13 million to meet the other goals means the total budget might need to be $38 million to meet all of those goals under that set of assumptions. So if we did have the funding sources discussed previously, like this would be a potential scenario that could be workable with that set of three funding strategies discussed earlier. Next slide. So this scenario kind of goes to the other end of the spectrum. Like, what if we only did the 9% projects that we're doing every year currently? We do one of those every year, keep that going. But then we did all of the additional units, the 138 units, through projects that don't qualify for tax credits. And the cost of those typical units, what if it were done all of using that approach? So obviously a lot more expensive to develop the local funding that would be needed for that, about $182 million total if it were all built out using this scenario, and the county's portion of that would be $91 million. I don't think anybody thinks this is the scenario we're going to do, but just to kind of illustrate that, on one spectrum, if it was all funded through tax credits, the other, if none of it were. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this slide and the next might be kind of more in the range of what we're kind of more focused on. So this slide reflects the 80%, 20% split. We talked about that as a potential ratio at the last meeting. And so this spreadsheet is meant to kind of, take one look at, how that might play out financially. So again, on the far left, we have the 50 units under 9%. That's the same as in all the previous slides. So 5.5 million to bring those 400 units online. And then at the 80-20 split, the number of additional tax credit units you would need under this scenario would be 100 per year. The cost to build those are the same as the previous slides, $35,000 per year is the local support needed. And then there would be 38 additional non-tax credit units built each year. And the cost to build those, again, based on, real projects that we have looked at recently, what those typical costs are, of local funding that's needed to make that project financially viable. So there'd be 31 million invested to build the 804% tax credit projects and 48 million invested to build 304 of the non-tax credit units. So, I mean, in a way, the good news under this set of assumptions is that you could build out this scenario and the total cost would be 42 million to meet the affordable rental goals and 56 million to meet all of the housing goals, which would be less than the 62 million, you know, theoretically available if we implemented the funding strategies discussed earlier. So this could be, you know, this could be a possible scenario that could work. As I kind of work through just thinking about these high level numbers, the part of what stood out to me is like in this scenario, we would be spending more local funding as a community. Like we would spend $48 million to build 304 units through the non-tax credit projects while spending $31 million to build 800 units through the tax credit 4% program. So, you know, investing more resources to produce a lot fewer units. So it made me want to kind of run one more scenario after I had first run this one. So let's look at the next slide as well, please. So the scenario 4, the last scenario to look at here, is basically looks at what if we spent the same amount of money as the previous slide as a community, $56 million, but we did a 90-10 split instead of 80-20. So that's the difference in this slide, is it's 90% and 10% rather than 80%, 20%. So under the 90-10 split, but spending the same $56 million, we could actually build 1,280 of the 4% units. We would still build 191 of the non-tax credit units. So for the same funding levels as identified in the previous slide, we could actually build 1,871 total affordable units for this, basically the same amount of funding. So I don't know, maybe another scenario to think about, regardless of kind of exactly what the level of funding is. It would produce more, you know, meaningfully more units, basically 160 of the 4% units per year instead of 100 per year. Okay, next slide, please. We're almost through. I think it's just 2 slides, Jeff. This is a slide we looked at earlier as a subcommittee as we started doing our goal setting. It's just a reminder of what other communities are doing around the state with the tax credit programs. Shows what Wake County has done since 2018 and Durham County, what they've done since 2019 with the 4% program. Obviously, really robust. Like Wake County has produced over 3,000 long-term affordable apartment units in just those 3 years. So really, really successful. Durham, over 1,000 in just a few years. New Hanover, you know, Orange, like of course Buncombe County, you know, we have gotten some done and we've started approving some others. But I don't know, I just kind of as I was going back through our old presentations, I just was I found this slide and was just struck again by how effectively these programs are being deployed in some of our peer communities across the state. Okay, next slide. And so this kind of comes back to like the policy issues for us to consider as a subcommittee, and then which we could, you know, bring forward to the commission. So one is like thinking about the goal again. You know, we have the goal of 1,500 affordable apartments, the workforce, home ownership, and home repair, and taking that recommendation forward for commission. We've already discussed that quite a bit. The second are the different funding strategies we could consider as a county government in lieu of a bond. So again, that's a potential increase to our annual funding. That's investment of a certain percentage of our ARPA funds into the housing space. We've already done a lot. You know, could we make, you know, kind of a decision about how much we might want to allocate in the next round of funding from ARPA towards meeting these goals? I think we're going to start discussing that process real soon for additional ARPA allocation, so we could think about whether we want to recommend an amount to go into that. And then third is the real estate. And we've already, I think the commission's already and the county management's already bought into the idea of reviewing these county properties for redevelopment. So that's already in the works, but then thinking about like the contribution that could make. Third, the bond referendum. So this is something that, of course, is already being diligenced, and we expect to hear further updates from the group working on that over the coming weeks. And I guess I would just share, like, as I've been thinking about these goals, the more, although I think there's big opportunities to pursue these goals, even in lieu of a bond, just how, like, really important I think a bond ultimately will be to meeting, and more importantly, perhaps exceeding these goals over time. The passage of a bond would assure that we have the financial resources to meet these goals, to exceed these goals, with as much flexibility as possible in terms of how to get that done. So I guess just as we await further feedback from the folks working on it, and we want to hear what they're saying, I'm more and more enthusiastic about it the more I've thought about it, whether it's in 2022 or if we're not ready this year, planning for this in 2024. I feel like we ought to really embrace this as a goal to take to the community. And then the last policy consideration would be around the affordable rental goal, the biggest and most ambitious piece of this of all. I think we do need to think about what strategy we want to focus on to achieve that in a way that's financially realistic and physically responsible. And just from kind of working through those exercises and preparing this presentation, I guess I've been more persuaded that like a scenario like scenario 4 has many advantages in terms of producing more affordable housing and doing it in a more physically responsible way for taxpayers. So I wanted to request consideration of adopting a scenario like that. Although again, the specific recommendation I would put forward for consideration would be to adopt a range of 1,500 up to the 1887 as like, that's the range we're shooting for. 1,500 is a goal with a stretch goal of 1887, and a plan to utilize a scenario like scenario 4 as the kind of physical strategy to do that, to get us to that goal. I think that's the last slide. So I know I've just talked a lot, so thank you all for the time to do that. And happy to, we can just open it up for discussion or questions at this time.
Quick question, does anyone recall if, I remember applying for some CDBG funds for home repair recently, we approved that as a full board. Did that application get accepted or rejected, or are we still waiting to hear?
The county was not among the recipients through that process in the last round. So we did not receive an award through that CDBG application process.
But we're going to try again.
Brownie, when are you wanting the committee to approve the financial piece of this? Is it now moving forward into the next couple of weeks, or is it taking some time to consider this, have staff do some financial analysis, waiting on the public land trust information to come back? I think there were some other key pieces out there, and then tying it into the budgeting process. Or are we wanting to do all of this in, sooner rather than later? What is your timeline that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So, I definitely envision, our committee talking about this again before we go to the county commission, right? So not figuring this all out today for sure, so we wanted to kind of, have a chance to kind of introduce some of these, this is all kind of within the scenarios of what we've been talking about, but obviously it goes into a greater level of detail and specificity, right? So, so I was envisioning like, our committee talk about it today, and plan on talking about it again. The we could, we could plan on putting this on the briefing discussion, so again, no decisions to be made at the commission level, but just to kind of introduce a bit this to conversation to the commission level. So we could do that at our next meeting, and then and then some future meeting. It could be the following one, or if we wanted to take a couple of a couple of weeks after that for it to get back to the commission. I mean, ultimately, I see all of this for any of the financial decisions we're making. They would all go ultimately into the budget, but we would want to make the recommendations to go into that budget. We don't want to wait too long to do that, so that we make sure the staff and the budget staff, everyone have start factoring this in at an early enough period that it can be digested within the budget process. So I guess I'm thinking, Amanda, over the next 30 to 60 days or something like that is kind of what I was hoping for from our committee level, and then going to the full commission in a couple of different separate meetings.
So my next question, then, I think, is probably to Sybil and Matthew, is when do we expect to have some at least preliminary recommendations back on a potential bond scenario, and also on the Ferry Road property, as we think about that and those financial implications? And also, are we considering the financial implications needed to staff up to meet these goals?
I can answer the first question about the TP&L study. So that we should have something, kind of their first phase back by the end of January, and we'll be sharing that with you all. And then the final phase is anticipated end of March, April timeframe. So that's when we would kind of know for sure whether we would move forward or not with the bond.
Hey, can I ask before we go, there are a couple other parts to Amanda's question here, but while we're on the bond update, Sybil, can you share with us, Trust for Public Land, I mean, great organization, and I'm glad they're working on this. Of course, their original motivation for this conversation is a lot around their organization's mission of, land resources and recreation and things like that. At this point in the process, is there anything the staff can share with us about to what degree their planning and diligence process is able to, realistically kind of encompass some of the feasibility around issues like affordable housing, which, I mean, they get why it's an important issue to us and want to be cooperative, but it is not their core mission. Is there a sense of that so far, as staff have been able to coordinate with them around the work they're doing?
Yes, I mean, to me, the first phase is really a financial and legal analysis. And they have, someone who, that's what their, bailiwick is. And they're in conversations with Don about that. So I don't have any doubts about them understanding, all the parameters around what financing options are available and what legal, limitations we have. And then the second piece, the phase 2, is really kind of the survey out in the community. And so that's just a matter of asking, the right question out in the community. So I don't really see, any limitations based on their expertise.
Okay,
So.
Good.
And the next question was around staffing. So Matt, you feel free to jump in. But Matt has requested additional positions in the budget. And of course, we're working to fill some of the positions that were funded mid-year. So Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
No, so I mean, just to reiterate that there are advertised positions currently that we're working to fill. They were originally contemplated for the fiscal year 23 budget request. So there are still some additional positions to be requesting through that regular process, of course, being vetted through the assistant county manager and their office before moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I just remember from our briefing it's been a couple of months now, when we looked at what other counties were doing and looking at those numbers from like Wake County today, I think they had well over 70, 80, 85 FTEs to accomplish those goals. And I think we're sitting at 1.5. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at how to factor that into our goals as well.
Yes, and I think if we were to pursue a bond, that would, necessitate an additional discussion around staffing.
Thanks, Sybil and Matt. I appreciate it.
All right, so I guess, are there other thoughts from Parker, Amanda, around just the timing for kind of taking this conversation around goals, strategies, potential financial resources that we could deploy? Again, like, these are things that are kind of within our control today. Bond is something that requires voters to be involved into, right? So I saw a comment from Jennifer saying like mid-March it would be helpful for us to have, if we're going to have recommendations in the chat, she indicated like mid-March would be helpful for us to, present those ideas to the commission and have enough time for the commission to deliberate on them to kind of arrive at, yeah, we feel good about these numbers, or, this seems challenging in light of the other things I'm sure we're going to be discussing too, to kind of have that conversation. So I guess I'm kind of inclined to think maybe we should just go ahead and have the briefing discussion like at our next meeting. Like there's no votes required, but it's an opportunity just kind of introduce these kinds of ideas to the commission to think about as potential scenarios. But I also want, our committee to have, I want us to have had a chance to also talk these through and make sure like we've answered the questions we want to have thought through at our committee level as well when we go there. So we could, in that scenario, we could have it on the briefing agenda, but we could also plan for this to be on our agenda at our meeting 2 weeks from now, so we could have some more time carved out to kind of go over this. I realized I threw out like a lot of data, and so we could all have time to think about it. If there's follow-up questions that folks have for staff, and staff would have a chance to also think more about this and provide feedback. So we could kind of move this ahead 2 weeks from now. If we don't do it at the next meeting, I think we should definitely be on the briefing agenda for the following meeting. But do y'all have any kind of thoughts on the timing?
Yeah, Brownie, I have a few thoughts and reactions. I think, I guess I kind of think it would be great to spend another 20 minutes talking about this again at our next meeting, and kind of, and I do think we should go ahead and bring something to the commission at the briefing to kind of show the broader board what we've been working on for the last 6 months, really. And I guess in our subcommittee, kind of discuss further what we think about your presentation and the data in it, and also like how much of it we do need to bring to the full board in the briefing. Is there some of this that we can leave out for that kind of goal setting discussion, I guess is my point, as opposed to a budget approval discussion, which are two different things in my mind, having not done this before. What was my other point? It's I guess, to take a step back, thanks for putting this together. It's really good news. It shows what appears to be multiple relatively conservative pathways to get to our goal. When we kind of set it, we didn't necessarily know that this was in fact achievable through multiple paths. So that's awesome, especially kind of with or without the bond scenario. And I guess at the risk of getting ahead of myself, my final thought on your kind of point number 2 that's on the screen, I guess I would advocate for where we are today. You know, I would advocate moving forward that we do increase annual funding, you know, in that kind of 3.8 million range, given that this is one of our full board's top priorities. And then, you know, hopefully one day there is a bond, and maybe it's this year, maybe it's in a couple, especially if it's in a couple years, you know, we'll be spending some more money kind of annually on achieving these goals. And certainly in a bond scenario, it seems like we could accelerate the timeline perhaps, or just kind of make all this easier with different options and potentially exceed the goal. So yeah, that's kind of my thought on budget planning, to kind of cast a wide net at achieving this would be my hope.
Okay, yeah, and I would just say, you know, I definitely wouldn't go into this level of detail at a full commission meeting, right? Like I think part of the point of our committee is to kind of dig into the weeds a bit, right? So I would definitely, if we do a presentation, I would envision trimming this down a bit, you know, kind of hitting more of the highlights. You know, I mean, Amanda asked a good question, you know, which is like, hey, if we're going to set these goals, like how are we going to get there, right? So I just, I mean, you know, in some ways of doing these things, you kind of set these goals, right? And then you're kind of like, we're just going to have to figure out how to do this along the way. But to the extent that you can figure out some key strategies up front, you know, you're potentially way better off at being successful and setting ambitious but doable goals. So I thought, you know, in light of the fact that there are some things we could decide to do in addition to being supportive of a bond, you know, kind of made me think a bit more about what some of those potential decisions could be that we need to, you know, that we could bring to our colleagues to think about in terms of annual appropriations and the ARPA funding, which we're going to be having, you know, discussions around how we want to allocate the ARPA funds going ahead. So that could be very timely as well over, you know, this actually, I think we're going to be talking about that at our next meeting anyway. So that'll be on our agenda. So Amanda, do you have any other kind of thoughts or questions, or just kind of any kind of just like feedback at this time? I mean, part of what I'm kind of hoping to get a sense of is like, you know, again, starting today, but you know, I'm certainly encourage folks to think about between now and the next meeting is like, what parts of this seem like, yeah, like we're probably all on the same page, or what areas, you know, might we really need to think more about and put discussion or have discussion around to see if we're to bring forward kind of a, you know, consensus set of recommendations for the commission to think about.
Yeah, and I do agree with Parker about having a continued discussion on this at our next meeting, because this gives us some additional time to process through it and bring it back to the table and make sure that we really are on the same page. I think there's still a few goals that we haven't fully fleshed out that we probably should as part of this as well. And I do like going ahead and bringing the goal portion to the full Board of Commissioners at our next meeting, so they can start to see that as we do in our budget season. So, and I appreciate the immense work that you put into these various scenarios. It's definitely given me a lot to think about over the next 2 weeks as we move forward. So thanks for that, Brownie.
Yeah, well, thanks. I kind of enjoy doing it. So it's, I think it's, you know, I think it's worthwhile to kind of think about different scenarios, right? Like, what are we doing now? What are different things we could do? So
I appreciate you running with that. When I said, hey, we need strategies, you came up with multiple. So thanks.
All right. Well,
here's a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry. In a scenario where we're in a regular board meeting and adopting goals, is it our intent or Brownie, your hope that we actually pick one of your, I think you had 4 different funding strategies, that kind of the 80-20 or the 90-10, like are we headed towards that level of specificity for that kind of full board meeting? Or
I would say, I mean, so when are we, it sounds like we should plan on talking about this at our next meeting. I think we should plan on doing a briefing presentation at the next commission meeting, but just a briefing discussion. So not a, you know, we're asking people to make any decisions. And when we have our follow-up discussion in 2 weeks, part of what I'd kind of like to do as we go through this is kind of think about the different policy recommendations. And if we can identify the ones that like the committee's like, yeah, we're all on the same page on this. Like this is a definite recommendation at this time. And then if there are some that we're not quite there yet, where we're saying like we're talking about this, but we're not maybe sure of a consensus recommendation yet. And in that way, when we talk to the commission, we can kind of be clear. Here are things that we can consider definite recommendations, and here are things that are still kind of more in the discussion phase at the commission level. But we want y'all to be aware of them, because if they come forward to the commission, they'll have, there'll be things that we want the full commission to weigh in on. So I kind of see it as a breakout like that, things that are sort of definite recommendations versus ideas that are still being vetted at the committee level.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
All right. Well, hey, we're already a little bit over time. But were there any other questions or thoughts for now, if on this item? If not, why don't we roll on over to, I think we're at public comment. Unless there's Matt or Sybil, any other next steps or announcements that you guys need to share with us?
Just a minor housekeeping, as with other items that are coming from this board to the full board. If one of you or all of you can communicate with Avril and let her know that you're planning for the February 1st briefing and the February 15th regular meeting, that would be helpful. And we can, well, it sounds like you all will be working on the slides at your next meeting. So we'll take whatever you finalize, those slides will go straight to Max and Lamar to project at the briefing. So
we will do that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Although just one quick point, it may not be the February 15th meeting that this goes ahead. I think that's a little bit TBD. I think we're feeling like, let's do the February 1st briefing, see how far along we are there. It may be either February 15th or maybe a March meeting would be where we would bring it back. So let's see. All right.
So just for clarification, at the February 1st Affordable Housing Committee meeting, you want to revisit and have a discussion surrounding these same items. And then also that same day, you'll be carrying something forward to the briefing, just so that I make sure I'm capturing the next steps correctly.
I think that's right. I think that's right, Matt. So the briefing, I mean, our committee meeting will kind of be like some further preparation for that briefing that we'll share with the commission that afternoon. Okay, are we ready for public comment?
Yeah, we did not have any announcements at this point, other than that we've moved to the new engage.buncombe platform. So at this point, I will see if we have any public comment.
So there is a slight 5 to 10 second delay between the meeting and watching it on public input. So if anyone would like to comment, now is your time to queue up. Otherwise, there have been some people typing in comments on public input during the meeting and on Facebook, and I will email that to the board and staff after this meeting concludes.
Okay, so do I take this to mean that we don't have any additional public comment at this time?
Yeah, I was giving it a few seconds, but it doesn't look like anyone's raised their hand for public comment.
Okay. All right. Well, if not, then I just want to say thanks to everyone for participating in today's meeting. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. How do you vote, Amanda?
Aye.
Parker?
Aye.
I also vote aye. So we are adjourned, and everyone have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.